Greetings, friends around the world. This is Dr. Bob Thiel for the Bible News Prophecy Channel. Today what I'd like to talk about is abortion, the Bible, and if there's a relationship to U.S. debt. Now, abortion is practiced all around the world, and for those of you who are not totally familiar with it, there's different forms of it. Abortion, for the purposes of this YouTube, is the human-induced killing of an unborn child, human baby. There are different kinds of abortions. There's something called a suction type abortion. This is where the unborn child is literally vacuumed from the mother's womb during the early stages of pregnancy. Then there's something called the curette type of abortion. This is where the child is cut out of the mother's womb with a spoon-like object. There's one that's kind of similar to a cesarean operation. The baby is surgically removed before it can really breathe, and it's just let out to suffocate. The fourth type is called the salt brine technique. The unborn child is literally pickled to death by injection of a strong salt solution. There's also different types of partial birth abortions. This is where a child is partially delivered, then stabbed in the skull to have his brain sucked out. There's also pills that cause abortions. There's something called the morning after pill. There also are other techniques that are abortion inducing, such as IUDs, which basically remove a fertilized egg. As a matter of fact, women who use an IUD will expel about one fertilized ovum per year. Certain birth control pills are also abortion inducing. Now, when does human life begin? When I was younger, there were debates about abortion and, oh, it's okay the first few weeks of pregnancy supposedly because this is not a human life. Well, that's nonsense. As a person with a doctorate in the biological sciences, I can assure you that human life begins when the sperm and the ovum unite and form a new creation. Okay, up until then, no, it's not a separate human life, but once that happens, it is a human life. Then, so the anti-abortion, or excuse me, the pro-abortion people have been advocating, well, maybe it's not a human, or maybe it's not a human because it can't live out of its mother's womb, or this kind of stuff. But the reality is they want to do abortions up until the time the baby delivers, and in some cases, I've even seen it advocated post-birth abortions. Huh? Yes, that's right. After the baby's born, they want the baby to be killed. So those are the types of things that we see in society. There's no doubt that the baby is human. Okay? And I suppose you can pick at what stage, but it starts at conception. Now, the Bible knows this. The Bible shows that, unlike humans, God knows that babies grow in the womb. Of course, most humans know this, but some of the pro-abortion people act otherwise. In Ecclesiastes chapter 11, verse 5, it says, "As you do not know what is the way of the wind, or how the bones grow in the womb of her who is with child, so you do not know the works of God who makes everything." So God says, you people, even if you know that the human's growing, you don't really know how, but I know that. Now, the Bible's also clear that God considers the unborn to be people. In Psalm 139, 13 through 16, it says, For you formed my inward parts. You covered me in my mother's womb. I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are your works, and that your soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in secret, and skillfully you wrought the lowest parts of the earth. Your eyes saw my substance being yet formed, and in your book they were all written. The days fashioned for me, when as yet there were none of them. So the psalmist is saying, look, God wrote me down in a book how I was being formed. This is before I was born. That was from David. Now this one's from Jeremiah, which a lot of people are familiar with. Jeremiah 1, Jeremiah 1, verses 4 through 5. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I sanctified you. I ordained you a prophet to the nations. So it's clear that from a biblical perspective, you're talking about a human being, a person. And you're not supposed to kill. That's one of the 10 Commandments. Now, as far as abortions, they've been done throughout history, sadly, but not as common as they are in our modern age. It's been estimated there's about 46 million abortions around the world each year in the 21st century. And since only about 137 million people died of the bubonic plague, more people died in the 21st century from abortion than the hideous Black Death called the bubonic plague. Now, the Bible prophesied in 2 Timothy 3:3, the Old King James Version, that people in the last days would be without natural affection. The Greek word astorgos basically means hard-hearted towards kindred. Oh, okay, well, if people kill their babies, they're certainly being hard-hearted toward their babies. Now, another thing that's happened because of abortions throughout the world is that since the late 1970s, it's been estimated there's at least 163 million abortions for the purposes of eliminating females. And so we have a tendency to, in certain cultures, such as in Asia, to produce more males than females. This, I think, also may help fulfill the prophecies related to the 200 million man army the Bible warns about is going to happen at the time of the end. Now, before I go too much further, I should say that we in the Continuing Church of God do believe that the Bible does allow for birth control. The principle for providing for one's family suggests that you can actually afford to do that, but we don't believe abortion is a legitimate form of it. One of the reasons we think I think it's allowed is in Matthew 24, 19 through 21. Jesus said, "Woe to those who are pregnant and who are nursing babies in those days." Well, since married couples are supposed to engage in relations with each other, the implication is that if you know how close we're at the end, perhaps you could be able to do something to prevent pregnancy. So I think that's one of the reasons. There's other scriptures in the Bible that I do think allow for birth control. And for those of you who are Roman Catholic, I should mention the Eastern Orthodox Catholics do believe that birth control is allowed. As far as abortions go, the Bible is clearly against them. I'm not going to read all the passages, but if you want, you can go to Exodus chapter 1, verses 15 through 21, where God basically blessed midwives who would not perform government-required partial birth abortions or post-birth abortions. Now, the Bible in 1 Timothy 4:1 warns about doctrines of demons, and I would suggest that this would be consistent with what abortion is. In Deuteronomy chapter 21, verse 9, God writes, "So you shall put away the guilt of innocent blood from among you when you do what is right in the sight of the Lord." And in Proverbs 6, verse 16, it says, "6 things the Lord hates. Yes, 7 are abomination to him." Continuing, "A proud look, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood." And abortion is shedding innocent blood. In Isaiah 59, starting verse 7, says, "Their feet run to evil, and they make haste to shed innocent blood. Their thoughts are thoughts of iniquity." So there's various parts of the Bible that warn about killing the innocent or shedding innocent blood, and babies are certainly innocent. There's a huge cost associated with abortion. There's emotional costs, there's family's costs, there's societal costs, but there's an interesting correlation that I came up with a few years ago that I'd like to talk about now. The abortions were illegal in the United States until the late 60s, and around that time certain states started to legalize this practice. And I'm going to read you something from the National Abortion Federation website. It says, between 1967 and 1973, 1/3 of the states liberalized or repealed their criminal abortion laws. All right, so at that time, from 67 to 73, we started to see a shift in the United States. Well, what happened to the United States in terms of its economy and debt from around that time? I'm going to read you from a textbook on economics called Economics, Introduction to Traditional and Progressive Views, 7th edition. It came out in 2008. It says, after World War II until 1970, the United States was a creditor nation lending money to other countries. As a creditor nation, other countries owed more money to the United States owned foreign countries. After the 1970s, so starting in 1971, well, the liberalization of, as they call it, of abortion laws started to happen, the U.S. became a net debtor nation. As a debtor nation, the United States owes more money to foreign countries than foreign countries owe the United States. The United States is now the largest debtor nation among all nations. And I will just comment further about that. What was happening is that with the United States, the trade balance, this is how much we sell foreigners versus how much we buy, that turned negative in around 1971. In the 1980s, our total debts to foreigners turned negative, so the United States went from being the biggest creditor nation of all time to the greatest debtor nation of all time during this period. Now, since 1973, the Roe versus Wade Supreme Court decision that legalized abortion or eliminated states' rights related to regulating it as much as they thought they had, the United States has murdered or aborted at least 55 million babies. And again, that does not count IUD, morning after pills, and various other types of pills and other inducements. The current U.S. President, Barack Obama, said regarding abortion, "I remain committed to protecting a woman's right to choose and this fundamental constitutional right." Now, I don't believe it's a fundamental constitutional right. And the Bible warns in the book of Romans, chapter 1, going through verse 32, against those who promote sexual immorality and other things that God is opposed to. And not just those who do them, in verse 32, it warns that those who approve of such things. Now, since 2008, the debt of the United States has greatly accelerated. The Bible considers debt to be a curse. If you go to Deuteronomy chapter 28, it says, the alien, starting verse 43, the alien who's among you shall rise higher and higher, and you above you, and you shall come down lower and lower. He shall lend to you, but you shall not lend to him. And that's what's happening now with the United States, as our debt to foreigners keeps going up. He shall be the head, you shall be the tail. Moreover, all these curses shall come upon you and pursue you and overtake you until you are destroyed, because you have not obeyed the voice of the Lord your God to keep his commandments. And so this is what's been happening. The U.S. debt keeps increasing. The United States is setting itself up for destruction. What people don't seem to realize is that, again, up until around 1971, the United States gave more to other countries than it took. But since 1971, as we've seen more and more distancing from biblical morality in the United States, we're seeing this debt going up, and people don't seem to be so concerned that we keep borrowing more and more and more and taking for more and more from other countries. This is going to affect the United States, and eventually it will lead to this destruction. You could also check that out in Habakkuk 2, verses 6 through 8, about a creditor nation having a country who borrows, loads pledges upon itself, being taken over. This is what will happen in the United States. Now, as far as abortions go, if you've ever personally had one or approved one, it doesn't mean you can't be forgiven. It's not the unpardonable sin, but it's certainly not something that should be encouraged. Life clearly does begin at conception. Abortion is brutal. It's a disgusting practice. There are costs associated to society, not just the emotional costs, the family costs, but I also think it's got to do with curses and the debt that the United States is accumulating. I do believe it's a factor. And actually, since 1973, 1974, the actual per capita standard of living in the United States, according to some reports, has not actually improved. And it should be, because we've got more technology and everything else. But I think sins such as abortion are one of the curses that the United States is starting to experience in terms of affecting its economy. Abortion is the killing of an innocent human baby. It's not something that people should do. Abortion is wrong. It has tremendous societal costs. And while people seem to think if somebody else does it doesn't affect them, I do believe that it's a factor affecting the United States and its economy. It's true other economies have more abortions in the United States, but they didn't have the Bible, they didn't understand it, they don't come from cultures that should. God holds those more accountable, because to those who much is given, much is required. So in the United States, we should not have ever legalized abortion, and we should actually outlaw it immediately. Abortion is wrong. Pray for this nation, because without national repentance soon, the United States is doomed. This is Dr. Bob Thiel for the Bible News Prophecy Channel.